This
How do you want to
conference
do it?
will
I'm in
now
your
be
hands.
recorded.
Right. So we are just recording this. Yeah. So uh, absolutely. First of all, Richard, right? I know you from the time when I first came to know you while I was reading certain blogs in the of the American Association of International Sales Profession,
Right.
AAISP, and
Yep.
that's where I first knew about you, and then I started reading your right. You don't write so much on the blogs, so right, whatever you get hand on, you try to read that. uh, exactly. You get people coming from the sales side, teaching how to do sales and their methodologies and all. But of course there is not too much who comes from inside sales side, and exactly talking around inside sales on here when we get access to people.
Got it.
So so predominantly this video of ours would be seen and viewed by people in India who are in inside sales
Okay.
and who are selling customized softwares and their services to US, UK, and the Canadian market,
Okay.
Australian market. Right?
Yep.
These are the category of audience who will be majorly be benefiting
Are they
from this.
mostly, are most people watching, are they going to be reps or managers or CEOs of those organizations or a little bit of everything?
Right. So it will be majorly the managers
Okay.
because right, I see that most of the reps are busy in their day-to-day activities, not getting enough time to learn. Right. Managers are always trying to optimize. Right. And I will specifically come to certain questions which they have. I will side and on look into my book. Right. So right, I will specifically come of certain things that they have been thinking on. First of all, most of them are in a very matured market where there are about 50 60 more such players providing similar type of category of products. Right. Of course it might differ. Somebody is more big, small, awarded, not awarded, etc. How do, when they penetrate and call on this, on the US and the Canadian and the Australian and this markets, uh, how do they stand and capture the attention?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's everybody has this challenge. It's not just whether or not you're in a very competitive market. Even people who are, only one or two players in the market still have this challenge of how do I stand out, right? I do think it is certainly more challenging when there are 50 players. The value that needs to be made is talking about the problems you solve and not what you do. I get emails and contacts all the time from people saying, "Hey, Richard, we do lead generation and we have the best system and we have the lowest cost and we're going to save you a ton of time." And that's all about you as the seller. That's got nothing to do with my problems with lead generation. If I'm looking for lead generation, my problems are I'm not hitting my revenue targets. I'm not hitting, and I'm not hitting revenue targets because I have bad data or I don't have enough quantity or quality. So the thing that I encourage everybody to do is make sure that when you talk about yourself, that one, you're really not talking about yourself. You're talking about the pains you solve for the person you're trying to contact, right? So I'll stop there because I could go on for a long time, but um, let me know if you have a follow-up question to that. That's my best advice on that one.
Right. Right. Now, the process, uh, methodology, right? First, I will take a process. Can it be
Sure.
broken to process? Let me first come out, Richard. You are coming from a land and where all the things that I read around is that I find California is very process oriented in their sales. They talk of a lot of process oriented in the sales. But let's please once bring in India, and here we are still not talking process much. So
Right.
when somebody is wanting to start a process, make the sales process, and it should not be a Herculean task. What is the simple four steps we will tell?
Yeah.
Do this
So
and
this another great question, and I appreciate the compliments to California, but believe me, I've seen many broken processes and lack of process as much as you've seen them existing. So it's not all perfect here. Um, the first thing I want to tell everybody or suggest to everybody is a process, particularly when you're first getting started, is a hypothesis, meaning it's what you think the process should be. And you can have good data, meaning you can try and examine 10 or 15 or 100 customer journeys and try and figure out what those processes are. But no matter what you decide today, you're going to tweak it again in 3 months or 6 months after you go and measure reality against this process you've created. So the goal of any process is to continually improve, not just to have one final process. So that's the first thing I want to change the mindset a little bit, that like, oh, once we define it, it's perfect. That's not how it works. I work with a lot of companies that have very big sales organizations, and they're always looking at auditing their sales process to see if they can make it a little bit better, right? So that being said, all processes, in my opinion, and you can call them lots of different things, but they all go through an early stage of qualifying. Then you go through a discovery stage, right? Then you go through a selection stage. Then you go through a negotiation stage, and then you go through closing. And what happens in each of those stages can change all the time, right? And it's never ever going to be 100% always this way with every client. There are some things that you're going to put in your qualifying stage that you may not figure out until you hit discovery, or there's going to be things that you have in your discovery stage that you're not going to that you're going to get in the qualifying stage, right? It kind of runs the gambit, but the goal of the process is to actually just to start to gather this data, particularly if you're early, and see which data matters the most, right? And so, for example, if people are using Salesforce, right? Salesforce will allow you to have, if I remember this correctly, if I go and create a qualifying stage in Salesforce, I could have 19 different fields in the qualifying stage. And that's great. That's fantastic. But after 3 or 4 months, I could probably whittle that 19 down to 10 based on what I really understand about my customers. So that's the goal of a process. That's how I encourage people to start to use a process. My question back to you, and to help me understand your market, is, do people not know to do a process, or do they think that they're just going in such a hurry that they don't need to do a process? Like, where's the mentality of what you see on your side?
The second option, that there
Okay.
is an effort to put in the process.
Yeah.
Should we give that effort, or we continue the hustle, and it is the art of the salesperson which
Yeah.
will be more divided?
So this is what I would encourage people to think about is, don't, put something down, but don't over engineer it, right? Don't feel like it needs to be perfect. And then I also remind you that, and I think particularly anything that you're going to be really great at, you got to follow a process, right? If you're a sports player, right? Like if someone's the great cricket players, right? That it's not because they're just all of a sudden born to be great cricket players, right? There might be one or two of those people, but that's not the norm, right? All these other athletes, they work on different skills. They watch their diet, they work out. They have a process that allows them to continually be better. And so that's how I encourage people to examine the process.
Right. um, Methodology. Of now, this is where I think more of art, right? Or it is how effective the person becomes. Now this is the process is moving from A to B. How you are moving from A to B, that's where the middle, right? Is it more about how you are communicating and conversing? Is that what is the core we are talking in the methodology part?
Yeah, I think so. I do, right? I say this a lot to people, is that people will do business with you not just because of what you do, but how you do business, right? How you communicate effectively verbally, how you communicate effectively in writing, all those things matter, right? And improving that skill set and understanding in sales how to earn the right to ask questions, how to ask questions, all those kinds of things, all of that matters. And people, even I still work on improving that. I still read books about improving my sales process or improving my sales skills and learning how to ask better questions and learning different techniques. So I think that is a huge, huge, crucial thing. And I'll give you an example that this happens a lot to me. I get a ton of inbound I'm sorry, not inbound leads, a ton of inbound sales pitches, right? Where people don't know anything about me. And all they do is send an email that, for lack of a better word, they throw up all over me about what they do, how they do it, how great they are, how wonderful they are. And then they ask me for a meeting. Well, frankly, you haven't even earned the right to send me that email, right? And that's what spam is. And so sometimes people think that, well, because I'm a human being and because I'm a salesperson, I can just send out 1,000 of these and I'll get enough responses to make business work for me. And maybe that works, right? Maybe that is possible. And I also think it's very different. Look, in your part of the world, you have if I'm not mistaken, your population's around 1 billion people, right?
Absolutely, you are
Yeah.
absolutely coming to the
So
point,
you don't
right?
have that
Uh,
here, right? And if you're selling to the United States, we don't like that. We don't want you to just send a LinkedIn in-mail or email telling us what you
uh,
do and then asking for a meeting. You haven't earned the right to send that email, and you haven't earned the right to ask for the meeting, much less try to sell us anything. And I know that that can feel, I try to look at this from the other person's point of view, that it's like, well, that's kind of arrogant. That's kind of maybe, I don't know if it's the U.S. arrogance or whatever, but in some ways there's truth to that. But the other thing to remember is we got 50 other people sending us the same thing. So at some point we're going to become annoyed. And unless you can find a way to change how you're doing and asking and communicating in a more effective way, you're really going to hurt yourself, in my opinion.
Beautiful. Now, exactly what I could assume that things going in your mind, exactly this also goes in my mind, is if this is not working, why people are continually continuing to doing the same habit again and again? Is it somewhere something working? Or I feel another thing which I feel is that as time is passing by, the returns on this number of replies on this type of sales activity is heavily decreasing further and further.
Yeah. Well, it's not working. Now the question becomes, do people have data that says, well, actually, Richard, it does work. Yeah, we send out 1,000 of them, and if we get 5 people to take a meeting, we consider that success. Well, that's okay if you want to call that success. The problem is that we call it burning the runway at the other 995 people.
Yes.
You're never going to
Yes.
be able to contact them again, not for a long
Right.
time. And even if
Mm.
you do, they're going to
Mm.
still remember you as an annoyance.
Right.
And so why people keep doing it, one is they don't actually have a process, which we talked
Mm.
about, to say,
Mm.
hey, rather than send this out to 1,000 people, let's send this out to 100 and see what this message gets. And let's send 100 a different message to these next 100. And based on those 2 tests, let's see which is the best message for the whole 800, right?
Beautiful. Beautiful. Right.
And if you get bad results in both of those things, then that
Mm.
means you have the wrong message.
Right. Yeah. Beautiful. Yes. Another part, right? Coming down, does sales engagement platforms help you to make processes gets implemented easily 50, 60, 70% of the time?
Talk to me about what you're calling a sales engagement, a sales platform. Give me an example of what you
Uh,
think, and I will.
I will be talking about, say, sales loft, outreach, these type
Yeah.
of right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we were on the same page. Yes. The problem is, again, if you don't have a proper process in place, all you're going to do is keep spamming and doing the same thing, right?
Mm,
Those tools like Outreach and SalesLoft are not built for mass emailing. They're built for better. But the problem is people don't want to take the time to be better. They just want to be faster. I say this a lot is that, you can either be, very few companies have figured out better, faster, and cheaper, right? That's what everybody wants. But most companies I know can only do two of the three. They can do
mm,
faster and cheaper, but they can't do better.
mm,
They can do better and faster, but it's not going to be cheaper,
mm,
right? And they can do
mm.
cheaper and they can do whatever the third one is. But I think you
Right,
follow what I'm saying.
right.
What people don't understand is that slowing down now means you speed up later. And that's
Mm,
the problem that people constantly don't understand. And it's the piece that people, until you put that triangle together effectively as three equal parts, you will continue to struggle. You won't fail, but you can struggle. And through that
mm,
struggle, that's where the failure could occur.
mm. Beautiful. Uh, Now, let's take an example. I am selling a value proposition which is longer to explain over the phone, not only because it is longish, just because your mental mindset, the audience's mental mindset, is wired to think something which is not aligned to what I am proposing, what I want him to think through. Taking this long discussion over the call and influencing over the call, is it that these spaces, emails are more important? My question number one. Number two, should these emails be written by the marketing team or by the sales team?
That's a great question. I love that question. So you have to understand the value of decision making, right? Like, and again, I think some of it could be, I genuinely think some of it could be cultural. Like you can make $1,000 decision. If it's $1,000 a month, $12,000 a year, you can make that in about an hour, right? As a human being. If you're asking someone to spend 50 grand, 100 grand, 200 grand a year for a SaaS platform, they're not going to make that decision in 30 minutes or an hour ever, right? And not only that, but they're not going to be able to make it by themselves. So I think the piece is that making sure you explain your value proposition, as it goes back to the first thing we talked about. Make sure what you're explaining speaks to the value proposition of the pains you solve for the audience, right? For me as the audience, rather than telling me what you do, right? And there's a balance in there. It's easy for me to say this. It's hard when you get into the conversation with the client, right, or with your customer. So that matters. As for who should write the emails from marketing or sales, um, please, as long as they're grammatically correct and there's no misspellings, I think that's the most important thing. Um, in some cases, salespeople can write their own emails. In some cases, they cannot. The problem I have with marketing writing all the sales content is that it becomes very buzzwordy. And unfortunately, marketing loves to talk about themselves, not themselves as marketers, but the company. When you're going to write emails from a marketing perspective, it needs to be written as a use case or a case study. That's the kind of email that gets someone's attention because it's about the customer's perspective. That's the best way I can describe it. How you would go and execute outside this conversation is different, but that's what I encourage all sales and marketing people to do when you're doing that value prop, explaining how you do things, explaining what you do it from the customer's point of view, not the marketing buzzword point of view.
Okay. Uh, Account-based selling,
Mm-hmm.
right? So uh, I will, right. So is it, what has been so different now that it was not there in account-based selling, or account-based selling was always a suggested way of doing outbound? It was the
Yeah.
same, just it got a new name.
Yeah.
What's your view on
Well, I
it?
think I think the technology's gotten better, right? Like you can do retargeting ads on websites and on Google and all those kinds of things. So I think the technology is a huge piece of why ABM is easier to grasp, understand, and implement. I think that's a big piece. I think marketing and sales have finally started realizing they need to work together. Um, and I think I have to give credit to Terminus and Sangram for his for his book Flip My Funnel, which I think just really resonated with a lot of people in sales and marketing to work better together. So I think that's a huge piece of where ABM is coming from. I think it existed before, but I think people were operating in silos. Marketing did what they wanted, sales did what they wanted. And so one of the things we're noticing here in the States is that you're starting to see this title of Chief Revenue Officer, CRO. And the CRO often comes from a business or sales side. And marketing actually does report into to the CRO because it's about a revenue team, right? It's about having a revenue operations team who can compare what marketing is doing to what sales is doing. Traditionally, we have sales and marketing, and you have sales ops over here and marketing ops, and rarely do the two ever chat. When you put them all together under one place with revenue ops and revenue teams, it becomes a lot easier for people to connect all the dots.
Right. So exactly that is where the LinkedIn post for we again got I right reached you over that. It was a Sangram's post. Somewhere it was that sales should report to marketing, right? So of
Yep.
course here in India, predominantly marketing is the upper hand, right? And I feel this is somewhere because digital marketing is working better than the
Yep.
spammy outbound,
Yeah,
and uh,
and it should be, right? Like let's face it, marketing and I talk to people about this all the time. Outbound sales is expensive. It's not hard, it's expensive to get
mm,
right.
mm,
Marketing, you can measure. Marketing is and again, marketing, in my opinion, has had more advanced technology and tools. They're about 3 to 5 years ahead of sales in many cases, right?
mm,
First
mm,
we had Google AdWords, right?
mm.
That alone changed the game for marketing, right?
Absolutely.
And then you start to have all these other platforms like Marketo and other things that really helped you understand the funnel from marketing. Whereas sales, and it's funny because companies wouldn't invest in sales the way they would marketing.
Mm,
Sales was just get on the phone and call people, make it happen. And it's like, well, that's not how it worked in marketing, but that's what we expect out of sales. So there's a maturity level that I think needs to occur. There's one other thing that I want to come back to, which goes back to one of your first questions. You cannot do ABM. You can't even attempt to do ABM unless you have good processes in place. You asked earlier about the process, and I'm not talking about the marketing process. I'm talking about the sales process. And I think that's a big piece of it. The other thing that I also think is a big challenge in ABM, and I'm curious to, if this is how it is for you. You said marketing sort of in charge. Yeah, marketing, we've seen that here, but what also started to happen was as soon as marketing's compensation was adjusted to measurable goals, they started to freak out. They didn't like being told that they have to drive 1,000 leads and 1,000 white paper downloads and 1,000 people to show up to a webinar, whatever it is. They freaked out on being paid on those kinds of metrics. Whereas salespeople are like, you mean you're not? Salespeople are like, we're being compensated on our metrics all the time. So some of what you're talking about is a compensation issue that as the world has shifted, as the ABM model is taking hold, and as the technology's improved, marketing has to start to acknowledge that their value can now be proven, right? And so I think those are some big shifts and thoughts to think about as it relates to the ABM world.
I will slightly go to the other school of thoughts of a slightly other differentiated way of thoughts of ABM. Let's take Engagio. So Terminus will be more about advertisement, and Engagio will talk about a human calling, right? It will talk about emailing, and it will talk about human calling, not about ads majorly, right? They will talk outbound going in, and they will name it as a marketing orchestration platform, right? But it's anyhow. and an outbound way. Uh, so they are suggesting that have an insight, which is of course all you are researching better to call on the people. Now, slowly, will outbound be, because outbound is expensive? Since outbound is expensive, you are trying to reach 10x bigger deals than the inbound leads, which is left to the marketing of, right? So that
Mhm.
means we will always knock large accounts, and since we will knock large accounts, you will be using ABM methodology over outbound in the coming years. That's what we will see.
I don't know, but it's tough. It's going to be interesting to see what happens with outbound prospecting, right? I don't think outbound prospecting is going to go away, but I don't know that you're going to have as much invested in it as you used to. You don't need to have, well, and there, it depends on who you're targeting. If you're targeting small businesses in the United States, insurance brokers and real estate agents and those kinds of things, outbound prospecting is a massive, massive way to get it done. Um, and it's a part of it. But there's going to be a connection between ABM and the outbound prospecting that needs to connect, right? That's going to need to be better than what it is now. And I still haven't put my finger on it, but it's going to continue to shift. And I think what's going to happen is the person doing outbound is going to have to get smarter at what they do. And I'm curious as to see, how it's great that we can go and hire all these college graduates to, bang the phones and do these outbound processes. But at some point, based on all this outbound emailing and calling, we should be getting data back to these people to make them smarter so they become less of a commodity and more of a skilled talent, and that you can really find people who excel in that role. And I think part of the challenges in the outbound space is that we hire people, at least here in the States. In the States, we hire people with, who want career paths and they want to go on to other things. And that becomes a challenge for the SDR role itself, because the average tenure, I think the last research I saw, the average SDR lasts 14 months, but their ramp time can be 90 days. So you're only getting effectiveness out of them for 11 months. And so at some point, I don't know if that model is going to break, but I feel like something's got to change in there. So that's, I don't know if I answered your question well enough. If not, please re-ask it and I'll attempt again.
Right. So are we when we are talking outbound, are we majorly talking about only calls or emails, or we are meaning both of them?
Oh, it's everything. It's way more than calls and emails. Outbounding
Mm,
is, as you said, you found me from, AAISP. Well, I do stuff with AAISP. I do stuff with Sales Hacker. I post stuff on LinkedIn. I do outbound calls. I do outbound emails. I do stuff on Twitter. You kind of have to fish where the fish are. So just by emailing and calling isn't enough anymore, right? If your
mm,
audience is on other platforms, then you need to be
mm,
on that platform. And I think
mm,
that's part of, I've seen these sort of, this amazing amount of in mails coming from LinkedIn where people are understanding like, hey, I can get through on LinkedIn better than I can email, which is great. But
mm.
if the message still sucks, then the message is still bad and you just ruined your LinkedIn connection attempt, right?
Right.
So so I think it's way more than calls and emails now. It's way more nuanced, it's way more scientific, and you've got to understand the medium is the message. How I say something on LinkedIn is going to be different than if I do it on Instagram, right?
Mm,
How I say something and engage the audience, how I do something in an email is different than if I leave the exact same message in a voicemail, right?
mm.
So the understanding the different mediums you can use and then how to effectively do that is a really, really important piece.
Right. Uh, we are getting as am I audible clearly?
Yeah.
Yeah, right. So more and more inbound leads, the conversion of inbound leads to closer is decreasing, right? And I primarily see that majorly because you are getting a lot of leads which are early in their buying stage. And that is where again you have to run the outbound sales in these type of leads. Correct me if my thoughts are right or wrong.
I don't. I mean, look, I can't tell you if your thoughts are right or wrong. I can just, I can see the value of what you're saying, though. If the quality of inbound leads is decreasing, that means your content is bad. It means your content is, and by bad, I mean it needs to be refreshed. It's stale.
Hmm.
You need to change it.
Hmm.
That's one piece of it. The other thing is, inbound leads, and one of my clients is a company called Intercom. And they do this web chat, when someone lands on your website. And if you aren't engaging in that, you're missing a tremendous amount of inbound leads, right? Even if those people aren't going to say, yes, I'm here to take a meeting, Richard, you've at least engaged them on a human level so that as they're continuing their research, hopefully they will come back as your inbound. So part of, I
Okay.
think, your strategy needs to shift as a whole, around SEO, around good content, around webinars and white papers and downloads and all that stuff still matters, but you're still missing the person who just comes and knocks on your door, just by landing on your website. And if you're missing that opportunity, I think it's a place you can explore to improve your quote unquote inbounds.
Okay. Bant.
Yeah.
The qualification. Right. So the qualification by band, I think I think no, I very definitely remember reading book of Mark Ruberberg where it was GPCT, right, and of course NEAT,
Mhm.
right.
Yep.
So can you please, right? So of course Richard has its own qualification process. He talks about NEAT, NEAT, right? Uh, can you slightly illuminate at that place? NEAT,
Yeah. So
right? Mm, mm.
yeah,
Please.
yeah. So are you asking me what do I see as the difference between the two?
Yeah.
Yeah. So
In
so
India, just sorry to interrupt. In India, Bant is very famous. That's what was I
no,
wanted
it's
to inform. Yeah.
look,
Yeah.
Bant is worldwide. Everybody knows
Mm,
Bant if you're in sales.
mm,
Occasionally I run into people who don't know it, but it's been around since I want to say the 50s or 60s. I think IBM came up with it. The
mm,
challenge with Bant, and this may go back to some of the messaging we talked about earlier, is that Bant is very sales driven. If the first thing I'm supposed to do is find out if somebody has a budget, well, then that's all about me as a salesperson. That's got nothing to do with the customer. If I then need to figure out what the authority is and who has authority, that's all about what I need as a salesperson, nothing to do with the customer. So it's not customer centric at all. With NEAT, the theory is that my goal is to focus on someone's need, focus on the customer's needs and the economics of that need, meaning what is the value to them by solving this problem in real time, meaning like not just, hey, if we do this, what's it going to do for your revenue? But, if part of what I do improves your free time, or instead of spending 8 hours a week on something, you're spending 4, the economic impact is, well, what are you going to do with those other 4 hours? Like, and I say that to a customer, like, what's the 4 hours worth to you every week? That's 16 hours a month, right? 50 hours, you're getting 2 months of your time back by the end of the year. What are you going to invest that 2 months of time back in to make your organization better? That's part of the economic impact. So the difference between BANT and NEAT, as I've written it, is that BANT is very salesperson focused. Mine, NEAT, is very customer focused, and it's about the customer. It's about what we want as a customer. That's the most important thing. If you can provide that to me as a customer, I will then be glad to listen to what you have to say about you.
okay, right. Uh, if it is two, three more important blogs of yours to read on for somebody to take this after this discussion to take on and go to slide detail. Uh, what will be that? I think you will be not ready with that now, Handy, or if you can share with that, what will be that two, three major blogs if an inside sales rep wants to read on to understand
So
this?
the first one is saleshacker.com. Tremendous content by my friend Max, who's built an amazing organization. He has tons of people, many who are way smarter than me, writing great content about inside sales and marketing, and uh, even the marketing stuff is related to inside sales. It's all about sales, and it's not even sales, inside sales. It can also be outside sales. So, so I think that's a great blog that I love to read. John Barrows, who's a good friend and mentor to me, I think is a great blog to read. I think that Salesforce's blog is pretty good, although for Salesforce, I feel like I'm walking into the world's biggest library. There's so much content; it's hard for me to get my arms around it.
Right,
Um,
right.
I think if you're focusing on an inbound approach, HubSpot is absolutely a great blog to read. Um, I think Keenan, this guy Keenan out of Denver, Keenan, has a website called A Sales Guy, and I think his content's really good. And he's also really fun. He's very engaging and entertaining, and does a lot of video stuff on LinkedIn. So if you don't follow Keenan, please do. Um, I think those are, I could probably go on, but I think that's enough for people to chew off on, to bite.
Yeah, yeah, two, three books which we will recommend to read.
Yeah, a couple of books. One is a book called Addicted to the Process by Scott Leese, and it talks all
Okay.
about having the value of a process, what it means to have a process, and it's also very good for people who are new to sales and inside sales, but also who need to sort of up their game and kind of get reminded of the basics. And I don't mean basics that are boring. I mean very interesting and intriguing stories with Scott. I think that's a favorite book. I think that Never Split the Difference is a book written by a guy named Chris Voss. V is in Victor, OSS. He's the former head of hostage negotiations for the FBI here in the United States. And he talks about how to negotiate with people. And there's a lot of stories in there about hostage negotiations. And then he takes those things and puts them into real world applications of how to negotiate a raise, how to negotiate with a difficult boss, how to negotiate with your children at bedtime, which I've used many times. Like it's a really fun read, but very, very practical.
Wow, wonderful. In case if we have a demand for the next round over follow up over this, uh, are we can we have that a privilege to have you again?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. What am I going to say? No.
Mhm.
I would, if anybody's ever done this with you and they've said no, take a bunch of those clips and put them together and send them to me because that would be funny. I would be happy to do it. I'm honored that, someone from across the world sought me out as someone who can share some knowledge and wisdom with people. That really it makes me feel good. And I'm certainly hoping that if people like what I've had to say, that they'd love to see me and I'd be happy to do it again.
If these managers wants to write to you, because
Yeah.
many of the things will be very personal, right, which cannot be publicly, right, posted over the LinkedIn also, right?
Right.
If they want to write to you and get in touch with you personally and understand and talk around, right, at least even on the mails, if you can help them, right, the type of environment that is there in California with so many people speaking around and so many stalwarts around. We don't have a single author. You tell me all the books that you named and go on and on with all the legitimate renowned books on the sales. Name a one which comes from India.
I
You don't,
couldn't. No, I couldn't.
right?
I couldn't tell you one. If there is one, I'd certainly love to know about it because I
Yeah.
think I think it would be interesting if someone wrote the book, and maybe it exists and I just don't know about it. If someone wrote the book of what the current state of sales is like in India, I think that would be a very eye-opening experience for them. And even if the premise of the book is I'm not sure what needs to change, but here's what we're doing, and something doesn't feel right about it, I think that'd be a very interesting blog series or book if someone would write it. I think that'd be fascinating.
Beautiful, right? And this is the place where most of the outsourcing of sales used to happen at one piece of time. Of course, this, right? This I feel that there is a lot of learned people in US coming to sales profession, right? Here, it has still been a profession of compulsion rather than a choice, right? And that's what these people coming around you can reach you. Can I share your email ID to them?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's Richard at the harrisconsultinggroup.com. By all means.
Again, if you can repeat, people can write.
Yeah,
Richard.
I know it's really long and I apologize.
Hmm,
Richard at the THE Harris Consultinggroup.com.
right. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, Richard.
Thank you for
I'm
having me.
sorry.
I appreciate it.
Right.
Thank you. I
Thanks.
know it's late there, so thank you for staying up and accommodating my schedule. I
Right.
very much appreciate it. And I promise
Right.
next time, you know what, we can do it at like 8 or 9 o'clock, California time, and you can do it during a regular day.
Right. Thanks. Thanks. Thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you for having me. Talk to you again
Right.
soon.
Yeah, please. Cheers.
Bye bye.
Bye bye.